don't piss off the crows because they will always remember you. They've done like these studies where like the scientists would go out and like they'd wear masks. Like there was one that was hilarious. Like I think they wore like a Dick Cheney mask, and then they would like yell at the crows or throw stuff at them to see what would happen. And they would remember, and they'd remember, oh yeah, Dick Cheney, he's a bad dude. And so they would come and like, attack or anyway, that was awesome.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Misshelved, your bi-weekly dose of bookstore love. I'm your host, Nicole Brinkley, here with an episode I am very excited about. Not only do we have a New York Times bestselling author, but we have a bookseller who I have admired for a good long time now. For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome. Every 2 weeks, I introduce you to an independent bookseller in conversation with an author they love. This week's indie bookseller is Candice Huber.
Hi, my name is Candice Huber, and I am the owner of Tubby Coo's Mid-City Bookshop in New Orleans.
Candice is in conversation with the wonderful Rebecca Roanhorse.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Roanhorse, and I am a writer of science fiction and fantasy.
Settle in as these two talk about a lot of things, their mutual love of sci-fi fantasy, how they got into reading, but most importantly, vampires.
Okay, we're left completely unattended now, Rebecca.
Party!
Yes.
Except we're old. At least I'm old, so I don't really party. But
I don't really party either. And it's Mardi Gras here in New Orleans right now, so everyone is partying except me.
I bet it is nuts there. I can't even imagine. Like, it's got to be a lot.
I haven't gone out, so I don't know, but I've seen pictures, and it seems, it's our first one in so long. And so I think people are just so excited to be doing a thing.
Over the top. I know. I went to New Orleans before Hurricane Katrina, like the year before. Mm-hmm. I haven't been back since, and I just, I'm always thinking of your city and what it must be like now and how much it's changed. But it was certainly an amazing place. The best food I have ever eaten in the entire world. And I spent like a month in Italy, and it does not come close to New Orleans. I am telling you.
I love that so much.
Oh my gosh. I was like, I'm going to gain 30 pounds and I do not care because it is worth it.
Oh my goodness. Well, I know that we wanted to talk about maybe some of our childhood fun media and what it looks like today. And I'm really curious as to what your favorite childhood stuff was. Book, movie, whatever.
Yeah. So I was a big reader, science fiction and fantasy from the beginning. Probably more fantasy. Although Dune was a big part of my life, especially when the movie came out and everything. I'm not even going to lie. I think I skipped school with my friend Nancy. We went to go see it at like the art house theater, and I was just like blown away. So like, I know a lot of people don't like the David Lynch version, but to me, it holds a special place in my heart. And not just because Sting wore a little metal like bathing suit thing, and I was a huge police fan, but because it was awesome. But anyway, so Dune, clearly, I read stuff like the Belgariad, which I always say, I didn't read Tolkien. I read like the Tolkien knockoff. I love the Dragonlance Chronicles. I was madly in love with Raistlin. He's like my first book boyfriend. For those of you who don't know, the Dragonlance Chronicles, Raistlin was this like little goth dude who was like wanted to become a god to like get back at everybody who had ever done him wrong. And I was like, now that's hot. So I loved him so. He meets a sad fate, I guess, but along the way, like his trials and tribulations were awesome. So Yeah, I think those were my sort of big early influences in the genre. What about you?
That's awesome. Fun fact, I actually didn't start reading science fiction and fantasy until I was much older. I did not read it as a kid.
Mm.
And that surprises a lot of people because of my life now.
Yeah.
But I didn't really read it when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I was super into Mary Higgins Clark. For those of you who don't know Mary Higgins Clark, she writes mysteries and they are very like formulaic, regular mysteries, but I was super into it when I was a kid. I read every single one. I only had money for used books. And so
Mm.
that is what was in used bookstores, at least in the area where I was. And so that's what I read. And so every time I could get one for 50 cents or whatever, I was so excited. And what's cool about that is that, I mean, I still have a whole bookshelf of Mary Higgins Clark books to this day. And I got to meet her at Book Expo America a few years ago.
Mm.
And that was just so cool because I got to tell her that, she like kept me alive. I had a rough childhood and reading her books just, helped me so much. And so that was really a really cool moment for me, was to actually get to tell her that. So that my childhood books were all Mary Higgins Clark mysteries.
That's awesome.
And and believe it or not, Ken Follett, which I may or may not should have been reading as a child, but
Yeah.
my mom did not believe in taking books away from me. And so I read pretty much whatever I want. And so weirdly, Ken Follett and Mary Higgins Clark were what I read.
What about
Yeah.
movies and TV shows? Did you have childhood faves?
I do. This is going to give my age away, I guess. But my favorite childhood movie was The Neverending Story, which, for those of you who don't know, that's like a 1980s, like Jim Henson puppets. And it was a fantasy movie. And it was about a boy named Bastian who is bullied severely in school. And he is running away from his bullies and escapes into a magical bookshop. And the owner of the bookshop gives him a book to literally escape into. And he does. And I, for many reasons, still love this movie. And it holds up better than you would think, considering it's an 80s movie.
Yeah.
The puppets are amazing. Like Jim Henson just could do no wrong with puppets. What about you?
Oh gosh. Okay, I'm old as like the hills, so this will totally give away my age. But I think my seminal childhood movie was The Lost Boys.
Oh,
And
yes.
for those who don't know, it's a vampire movie with like Kiefer Sutherland and Jason, whose name I can't remember now. He was a big actor at the time. The two Corys, Corey Haim, Corey Feldman. And I don't know, it's kind of like sexy vampires on a California beach town. And I remember we came to New Mexico. I grew up in Texas, but like I spent a lot of time in New Mexico with friends and relatives and stuff. And they were showing it at an Albuquerque theater, and it had just come out. I was with my mom, and I was like, "We have to go see it." And my mom was like, "It's some weird kid vampire horror thing. I'm not going to see this." And I was like, "No, you don't understand. I have to see it." And so I did convince her to go. I don't know what she thought about it overall, but I did buy a huge poster, and that like went on my wall at home, right next to my Smiths poster. I was also kind of obsessed with like the Smiths and the Cure, and I did watch it recently, and I feel like it holds up great.
Amazing. Kiefer Sutherland is so hot in The Lost Boys. And Jason Patrick, I think was the guy's name.
Yes.
And oh my gosh, yes, that's a good one.
Yes.
Vampires. Maybe we should talk about vampires.
Oh, well, you are in New Orleans. That would make sense.
It's true. And we are such a supernatural city in so many ways. And vampires are so big here. And, many people believe that they're real here, which I would not be surprised if vampires were real in New Orleans. But yeah, vampire stuff has changed so much, but also remain the same.
Yeah,
It's so funny
absolutely.
how
Such
it
an
endures.
enduring. Yeah, exactly. So who are your favorite vampires in fiction?
Oh, this is a really good question. My favorite vampires, I would really have to think about it in books. I don't read a ton of vampire books, really. I, of course, read Interview with a Vampire because everyone who lives in New Orleans has read Anne Rice.
Yes, it's
And
required, I believe.
yeah, absolutely it is. But I wouldn't say those are my favorite. I actually
Hmm.
didn't like them that much.
Hmm.
The vampires in Interview with the Vampire. I found them, I don't know, I guess because I was fairly young when I read them, I didn't really identify with them at all. And the vampires that I like, even though they are millions of years old, I identify with them. I actually really love the vampires in Octavia Butler's Fledgling. I don't know if
Ooh.
you or anyone listening has read it. It is her one and only vampire novel. And it is so interesting and creepy. And the main character is a vampire who has amnesia. And the story is her kind of finding out what happened to her and her clan. And it is just, it's so good. So I would say I love that vampire. And I love The Lost Boys and vampires in movies. I love really silly vampire movies. So,
Mhm.
like Leslie Nielsen
Oh,
as
yeah. Oh,
a
my goodness.
vampire. That kind of stuff is the kind of stuff that I normally like when it comes to vampires.
I vaguely remember there was a Nicolas Cage vampire movie.
Oh
Uh, you
yeah.
remember that where he gets seduced by like a beautiful woman or something and she's a vampire? I seem to remember liking that like back in the day, but now I can't remember any details. So don't hold me to it. If it's terrible or like completely like offensive, I'm just gonna be like, sorry, I was like 10. I don't know. But I think my favorite fictional vampire, and I'm just a sucker for a certain type of like book boyfriend. But I love Jean Claude in the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series.
Ooh, yes.
And so if you guys have not read that one, oh, okay. So it's got like 30, I don't even know how many are in that series now, 20, 30. It's got a ton. And this sort of was a seminal series in the 90s, urban fantasy. And it follows the main character, Anita Blake. She is a vampire hunter. And I guess it has sort of a Buffy sort of feel, but she's an adult. She's not a teenager, and the vampires have these complicated courts, and they're kind of like royalty, and they have like lieges, like masters that they're attached to. Anyway, the point is there's this vampire Jean Claude, and you see him sort of come up through the ranks. Like, it's very interesting. In the first book he's sort of a nobody, but he's very manipulative and he's very sneaky and like hot. Of course. And so he and Anita, like, sort of create this relationship, and he comes up to the ranks until he's a super powerful vampire because he kills everybody else with Anita's help. And I just loved those. I thought those were so cool. I remember I discovered my very first Anita Blake Vampire Hunter book. Like, I was coming home from college and I was in an airport bookstore somewhere. And I was just looking through books, like trying to find something to read on the plane. And I pick up this book. And on the back, it says, "Who will Anita choose? Will she choose her vampire lover or her werewolf lover?" And I was like, I don't know, but I'm about to find out. I was so excited. Like, I'd never seen a book like that. And so that was like, I know now like shifter books and all that stuff is like pretty common, but this was like 20 years ago. And it was the first time I had seen that and thought to myself, hey, they let you write this? You can write this stuff and like get it published and then like have it on the shelf at the airport and people read it? That's awesome. And so from there, I was just like a lover of urban fantasy. And so I went through a whole urban fantasy phase, which actually led to me writing my first book, which was essentially an urban fantasy.
Amazing. Was that
Yeah.
Trail of Lightning
Yes,
your
it
first
was.
one, right? Ah,
Yes.
so good.
Thank you. And so it's all, so they didn't really market it as urban fantasy because urban fantasy is dead, quote unquote. But clearly that's what it is. And I was like,
Yep.
instead of having like European monsters, I want monsters and gods and all of that stuff from the Americas, and I had indigenous monsters and gods. And that was really my motivation, though. Blame Anita Blake.
That's amazing. I love that that was your sort of your inspiration that, hey, I can write this kind of stuff and somebody will read it. And that's awesome.
I know.
I appreciate Anita Blake for that. I also love that series. It's very good. Yeah.
It gets a little wonky, I'd say, after like the 10th book, but
I don't think I've read that far in it, but yeah. I also really love Jewel Gomez, the Gilda stories. That is a really cool vampire as well. She runs away from actually a Louisiana plantation, and the novel follows her. She's an immortal vampire through like 200 years of her life. And so she runs away from a plantation, and then she goes to a brothel, and it's run by a vampire, and then she gets transformed into a vampire, and then she takes Gilda's name and then goes on her own journey. It's very good. That one is a little bit old school as well. It was a queer book that I found as a young baby queer, and I think that is another reason why it influenced me. It was like, oh, vampires and queer stuff.
Yes.
Things can go together. Yes.
They belong together. And speaking of New Orleans and queer vampires, I forgot one of my early books also was Poppy Z. Bright. Lost Souls, right? Which was just so visceral and just blew me away. Again, another book, I'd never read anything like it. And for those who don't know, Poppy Z. Bright is, I believe they are from New Orleans. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and the book is certainly set there. And it follows this little goth kid named Nothing as he like finds his destiny with a rock band made full of vampires. And it was just, as a teenager, I was like, this is it. This is the life. This is everything I ever wanted.
Absolutely. Because they like wander around. They're all outcasts, and they just are wandering around.
Causing chaos, like partying, drugs, hookups, like all that stuff. I was like, oh, look at this world. It's so shiny. But anyway, yeah, very cool.
That was like a 90s cult favorite, I think, that book. At least here in New Orleans it was. Absolutely. I don't know if it was anywhere else, but it was definitely like a cult favorite of the 90s when I was developing. And gods too. I know you brought up gods, and gods is something that really interests me, and I assume interests you since you have a lot of them throughout really all of your things that I've read.
Yes.
And so they've always interested me because not just like mythological gods, but there's just so many of them out there. And so there's like all these different stories that you can tell. And I love just how everyone now has like different takes on different gods. And I don't know, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, and actually, I was a religious studies major. So I went to Catholic school for the first 8 years of my life, although I am not Catholic. But I feel like I'm like, like honorary Catholic, because that was a lot. And then I studied religious studies at Yale as an undergrad, and then went on and did a master's degree in theology at Union Theological, which is part of Columbia University. And so I'm not ordained or anything. These were all sort of terminal secular degrees. But I find religion fascinating. And I find faith and belief fascinating. And so, yes, you will see that my characters, especially like Serapio, who is a character in Black Sun.
Oh my gosh.
I am obsessed with his journey.
Me too.
Because I really wanted to explore this idea of like faith and like what it means to be chosen or to feel like you were chosen by your God for like a certain role. Like, so he's sort of a chosen one, but the idea was to really trouble this concept of what it is to be a chosen one. And then what happens when you're not chosen anymore? What happens after that? They never tell you. And so that's really, what I'm trying to do in the second book too, to spoil that just a little bit, but I don't think it's too much of a spoiler. But to sort of struggle with like faith and gods and all of this sort of stuff. It's all through my work. It always will be. I'm just obsessed with it.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me too. And I live in New Orleans, so went to Catholic school all my life because, here Catholic school is pretty much what most people do if you have the
Right.
privilege and the money to do it. And so I went to Catholic school my whole entire life, and I am not Catholic, but my family was very devout Catholic. And so grew up that way. So I've always been fascinated by it as well. And I did some studies on world religions in college. I didn't major in it, but I took a lot of classes and did a lot of studies on it because I've also always just been fascinated by religion and gods and what makes people believe. And it's amazing to me how similar everything is, sort of.
Yeah.
even as different as it is, it also is super similar in all of that. So I just have always found belief and stuff really interesting, and maybe that's why I love your book so much, because
Probably. You're like this kid went to Catholic school, I can tell.
yeah, I'm like, oh, Serapio, I understand you. Except I really wish I could be friends with the crows in the way that Serapio is, without trying to give a lot away.
Yeah.
Crows are amazing, and I want to be friends with them.
Yeah.
And this book, it was just like, I could see my like 90s goth child self like just loved this book because it was just so, I always say it all my book reviews, and I know you see it all over Twitter. It's like, this is so metal, because it's like, it's like all the crows and the gods. And anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to fanboy out.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. You know what? It's so funny because when I wrote the book, I was very sort of, is this indulgent? Because these are the things I love too, right? Like I was a little like goth kid. And actually at the house I was living at when I started writing Black Sun, I lived up on this mountain and this flock of crows would come. They say not to call them a murder, although I love calling them a murder of crows, but I'll just call them a flock. So like the crow people don't get mad at me. Would come and they'd circle around, and there was a house near us that was vacant. And they would come and they would roost on that house, and they would just love staying there. And then they'd come over, across. We had an upstairs like balcony. And they would just like, talk to me all the time. And so like crows were just in my life. And I was like, oh, what's the deal with the crows? And so I started doing like corvid research and just finding like all the fascinating things about them. Like, the most important thing, of course, is they never forget a face. Not only do they not forget your face, but they tell their children and their children's children about you.
What?
Yeah, so don't piss off the crows because they will always remember you. They've done like these studies where like the scientists would go out and like they'd wear masks. Like there was one that was hilarious. Like I think they wore like a Dick Cheney mask, and then they would like yell at the crows or throw stuff at them to see what would happen. And they would remember, and they'd remember, oh yeah, Dick Cheney, he's a bad dude. And so they would come and like, attack or anyway, that was awesome. And so they never forget a face. They pass it down like generationally. They are creatures of revenge for sure. They hold funerals. They have like crow funerals. Like if a crow dies, they'll all come and like check it out. And like I try to figure out, I think, why the crow died so they can avoid, dying themselves in the future. But often, they'll sort of gather around and have like a little funeral. Oh gosh, I don't know. There's all these like really cool facts. And there's a wonderful book called Gift of the Crows. And I can't remember who wrote it. I can barely see it on my bookshelf over there. But it just has all these like wonderful facts about corvids. And that was actually part of the inspiration for the mythology in Black Sun, was this idea of revenge. And like, so what is a crow? Like to me, the essence of it was this like long memory and like revenge. And so if I were going to create a society where like crows were the gods, or like embodied their god, then what would be the defining aspects of that culture? And it would be a culture focused on revenge. And out of that comes like the whole story. And for those who don't know, because I'm just assuming like you know my books, Black Sun is an epic fantasy inspired by the pre-Columbian cultures of the Americas, inspired by, not factually accurate. I took a lot of liberties. It is definitely a fantasy. There's giant crows you can ride, among other things, and magic and blood and revenge and all sorts of fun stuff. So
it is
yeah.
very good. And as the bookseller on this podcast, I'm going to say it is legitimately one of my favorite books ever. And I tell people this, and I'm like, y'all, everybody has to read this book. And I'm always throwing it at people because it really is like, I love this book so much. And the second one is just as good because I am a bookseller and I got to read an arc of it. I'm so excited that they sent it to me. As soon as I saw it, I was like, I'm not doing any work until I finish this book. So from a bookseller perspective, I also believe you should read this book because it is very good. So there are several animals, like big animals that you can ride in this world. And it reminded me of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I was wondering if that had if you even cared about that show, because I was like, this seems very like they also have these big, weird animals that you can ride. And it was evoking that for me when I was reading it.
Yeah, I love Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I only came to it in the past couple of years. I watched it all with my daughter. She's now 14, but I think we watched it when she was like 11 or 12 or something. I feel like it was early COVID or pre-COVID where we just binged the whole series. So good. Such good storytelling. Really, really, really nice. But no, I don't think the little water buffalo, don't they like fly on a water buffalo?
Yes.
I am the worst. By the way, I'm the worst fan ever of anything. any like Marvel, Star Wars. I write in those worlds, but if you ask me questions, I'll be like, I don't know. I'll have to look that up. Like I just fan knowledge just goes right out my head. But anyway, so I believe they ride a very cool water buffalo, and so no, most of my flying creatures are birds of some kind, avians, except for the winged serpent. There is a clan in Black Sun that rides winged serpents. And that was really me wanting to find that indigenous Mesoamerican creature to like sort of compete with the dragon. Like we're not putting any dragons in my story because this takes place in like Mesoamerica or a fake Mesoamerica. So what would be the equivalent? And I was like, well, winged serpents because they're so badass. So that's actually, there are those. There are eagles and crows and water striders, which is a bug because I love the idea of like these massive insects, people riding these massive insects through like waterways and stuff. Because you don't really get to see a lot of that. You always see kind of like sexy animals that, you know, you get to ride on. And I wasn't sure that a water strider was that sexy, but I definitely wanted to put it in the book.
Oh, you make it sexy though.
Oh, yay.
That's so fascinating to me. The water strider is probably my favorite of all of them because it is just a giant bug, but it's also like so cool the way they can ride them. In Avatar, it's sky bison.
Yes, sky bison.
Appa is the
Yes,
sky
Appa.
bison. I love the sky bison so much. And speaking of which, one thing that I think Avatar: The Last Airbender does really well is villain redemption.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, because sorry if that's a spoiler alert. And I guess we didn't really say what Avatar: The Last Airbender was. It is a cartoon TV show from, I believe, the early 2000s on Nickelodeon. And it is so good. If you haven't watched it, you should definitely go watch it because it is great. There's a character on there named Zuko, and he is a firebender. They can manipulate the elements in this show, and so he's a firebender. And the Fire Clan are the bad guys in this story. And he has a really good, spoiler alert, villain redemption story. And that is one thing. I love a good villain redemption story. And Zuko has one of the best ones, I think, that I've experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. And they took their time with it, and it was nuanced, and, it felt real. And he was not perfect. He made a lot of mistakes along his path to redemption. Yeah, absolute fave. Very, very cool. And by far one of my favorite episodes. And again, I'm terrible with like fan stuff, so please don't beat me if I get things wrong. But it's the one where he and his sister and her friends, they all go to like a beach town or something. They're like on
Yes.
vacation. Do you remember which
Yep.
episode it's? Oh my god. That
Yes.
is one of the best things I've ever seen in my life. Trying to see them like fit in and like hang out with the normal kids, and they are so
Yes.
not normal. Oh, and it's awesome.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I love that episode too.
Yes.
And the other thing I really love is when him and his girlfriend, who I forget her name on the show, they have a moment where they're like staring out at something and he says like, I hate everything, and she basically says me too, and it's oh my gosh, it is so perfect. I'm like, I love it so much. Cartoons seem to do villain redemption arcs really well. Like She-Ra also does it. They rebooted She-Ra because I did watch it as a kid as well. But the new She-Ra does it with Catra. I don't know if you watched it, but that's also a very good redemption arc, villain redemption arc too. Do you have any favorites in books? I'm trying to think of like, which villain redemption arcs in books do I like? But I really need to think about that one.
I know I would have to like go look at the bookshelf and be like, You know what? Again, speaking of like animation, did you see Arcane? It recently came out on Netflix. Okay, it is really excellent. It is an animation that came out. It's inspired by a game. So my expectations were fairly low, and I'm not familiar with the game. I don't play it, but the trailer to Arcane just looked awesome. So I watched it, and it is so good. Like, not only is the animation really good, but the writing is great. Like, if you want to study like character development and like third episode twists, which is a very common thing. I also write for TV. So like you have 3 episodes till they tell you to capture your audience. If you don't have them by the 3rd episode, they're out. So you really need to like end your 3rd episode on like a banger. And wow, did Arcane like deliver. It is just amazing. And then I was obsessed. The world building is great. And the villain in that, at the beginning, you're like, who is this evil dude? Whatever, I don't care. But by the end, my heart was breaking. I was like, oh my God, I love you. Please don't die. I don't think that was a spoiler because I didn't say that he did die or not. I just didn't want him to die.
Right.
Oh, but it's so good. It's really, really good.
I'm gonna have to watch that. It's popped up as like recommended on my Netflix a bunch, but I haven't actually watched it. So now that you say that, I am definitely gonna have to go and watch it now because it sounds really good and it looks so interesting. And it's sort of just been nebulously sitting there in my Netflix for a while.
Give it at least 3 episodes. I guarantee you after episode 3, you will watch the rest. It's so good.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. I will definitely give it 3 episodes. I didn't know that was like a rule in TV writing, but now it makes so much sense.
Yep.
Because the first episode very rarely hooks me.
Yeah.
I have to give it 2 or 3 and then I'm either hooked or not. And so I think that is actually very accurate. So
yes,
that makes sense.
Oh, goodness. So what are you watching these days on TV?
Let's see. I currently am watching a Spanish TV show from like Spain and Europe, and it is called Money Heist.
Oh, I watched Money Heist.
Yeah, it's so good, right? I have really been enjoying it. I'm in season 4. The first season is a little bit longer, and then all the other seasons are pretty short. And I've been really enjoying it. It is very Spanish soap opera in that it has a lot of happily ever after love stories that I did not expect to be happily ever afters because it is a heist where people die, like things are happening. Yes. And so I didn't think it was that kind of show. But when every single romance had a happily ever after, I was like, I love this so much. I'm a sucker for a heist. So anything with a heist in it. And so that's why I started watching it. But then as it went along, like every episode sort of ends on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And so you want to keep going and keep going. And then at the end, I was just like, wait a minute. As unrealistic as this is, all of them get happy endings very unrealistically. I'm here for this.
I've only watched the first season, but I remember watching the
Okay.
first season. Most of it takes place inside like a bank, and people have been kidnapped, and it's tense over a period of X amount of hours. And I just kept thinking, can these people not keep it in their pants for like 3 days? I don't understand. But it's totally enjoyable. After you sort of get over that aspect of it, you're like, aren't you a little busy, being shot at by the police? Is this really a hookup time? No. But once you get past that, it's so much fun. Yeah, absolutely. My goodness.
Well, I would love to like keep talking, but I really think that we're out of time, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah.
But I have had such a good time talking to you, and I super appreciate your time because you are legitimately one of my favorite authors. And I do love all of your books. I found you with Trail of Lightning. And then after I read Trail of Lightning, I went back and read some of your short stories that I found online because at the time I couldn't find anything else. And then since then you've written so much. Now you write for TV, and Trail of Lightning has a sequel, and now we have Black Sun and the sequel. Oh my gosh. And you write Star Wars books and like you've written so much, and I've just been so excited to be a fan of yours. And so thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to me on this podcast today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And if people want to find my work, they can find it at RebeccaRoanhorse.com. Books, comics, maybe not the TV stuff, because most of that's top secret and coming in the coming year. And then I'm on Instagram at Rebecca Roanhorse. And what about you, Candice? Where can people find you?
Yes, so you can find my bookstore, Tubby Coo's, is online. It's just tubbyandcoos.com. Everyone asks me what that is, and Tubby and Coo were my grandparents. So in case anyone was wondering, that's why my store is named Tubby and Coo's, but it's TUBBYANDCOOS.com. And also the same on all the social media is just at Tubby and Coo's. And I'm on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, pretty much anywhere. And thank you for listening.
Does anybody else want to read vampire romances now, or is it just me who's going to go on that binge? Just me? That's all right. I am totally fine with that. Thank you all so much for listening, and for Candice and Rebecca for taking the time with us today. You know all the usual reminders. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Rate us if you like us. Subscribe to the newsletter. Follow us on social media. All that fun stuff. We'll be back in another 2 weeks with another full episode. Until then, happy reading.